At times, it felt the rain and snow wouldn't stop.
We begin with breaking news this morning. Powerful wind and rain moving through our area right now.
The park is flooded.
The water almost up to my knees, and more water continues to flow.
I got you.
Roads flooded, snow trapped people in their homes.
Reservoirs released water, a lot of it washed out to sea.
The ABC10 Weather Team investigates. Is California wasting water?
I'm ABC10 Chief Meteorologist Monica Woods alongside our weather team, Rob Carmark, Carly Gomez, and Brendan Minchev.
In the next half hour, we will investigate what the state is doing to capture and store our water.
California's water network is designed to deal with months of water scarcity.
But weather whiplash and a changing population is making the challenge even more difficult.
We're talking to the state's top scientists, starting with how more reservoirs may be in our future, but location and design will be key.
We built our water system in California principally around scarcity. 2 out of 3 years, we don't have enough water.
To address that scarcity, California built one of the most elaborate water conveyance systems in the world, capturing snowmelt runoff, storing it above and below ground, then moving it vast distances. Without it, California wouldn't be the economic powerhouse it is today. But that system is being pushed to meet multiple needs, from water storage to flood control.
Several vehicles stranded.
Plus recreation, hydropower, and the environment.
So we ask a lot of these reservoirs, but our reservoirs are principally built as water supply structures, and that's the way we operate them, except in the winter, right? I mean, this is one of the things that everybody forgets, that in the winter, let's take this wet year that we're having in 2023. We're going to end up with more water than we know what to do with in the fall. And I know what we're going to do is we're going to have to let that water go. So we make room for potential floods next winter.
Creating tension between flood managers and people wanting to see a full reservoir for water supply.
So much of how that's operated is based on manuals and calendars that were put into place 30, 40, 50 years ago. And things change.
Daniel is a third-generation farmer in the Central Valley. He, like many other farmers, relies on water coming from Northern California.
If you look back, we have cycles. We have wet cycles and dry cycles in the state, and that's what a lot of the reservoirs and canal systems were built for, was to help manage that.
But with a growing population, these water supply structures are starting to get stretched close to their breaking point. Drew Lassard with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation that runs Folsom says this concern is guiding managers to rethink reservoir operations.
Where do we get to that point where we can ask no more of it? Probably we're getting close to that, but we're still looking at ways that we can make and gain efficiencies.
Drew says part of making Folsom more efficient will be expanding its capacity.
The Corps has authorization to raise Folsom Dam 3 feet.
Making room for even more storage. Another project in the works, updating operation manuals. These will rely on improving forecasts, giving reservoir managers more certainty about how much water to let out and how much water they can keep in.
It's sort of the software. The hardware has been built, and now it's how do we work the software on how we route things.
Folsom is sometimes called the little dam that could. Even beyond flood control and water supply, it's also the first responder when it comes to sending water south towards the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta to help keep the water fresh and not salty. This is quite possibly one of the biggest bones of contention for water wasted out to sea.
That seems to be the bigger issue that I see, is usually environmental groups aren't that eager to work with farmers or look at growers that are south of the Delta as big evil corporations.
Daniel says farmers are constantly put in a corner, blamed for wasting water, but he feels there are still solutions out there.
I think a reservoir in the right place would be a great tool for us to use.
An American River Basin study found that more upstream reservoirs closer to the base of the Sierra might in fact be the answer to some of our climate whiplash, with more rain instead of snow falling in the Sierra.
One project being considered is the Alder Reservoir.
It's strategically located so that when there's large rain events, we could be capturing that water directly, or as the snow melts, we're also able to capture it too and relieve some of that operational pressure on Folsom.
Helping with water supply, reducing flood risk, and providing cold water releases for certain fish species.
As we saw this past winter, Folsom was releasing water because there's just not enough storage capacity in Folsom. So this would be able to allow this water to be captured versus spilled where it wouldn't be able to be usable.
The idea for this reservoir has been on the books since 1916, when a lot of agricultural growth was happening in El Dorado County. People needing water went looking upstream.
So this would be a part of a system of reservoirs along the South Fork of the American River. The bottom part would be Folsom Reservoir, and as you go upstream, there were numerous, up to 16 reservoirs planned at that time.
This is the only one still being considered due to its location with a deep canyon perfect for storing cold water, which will also help reduce evaporation loss.
The system that we have in place that really sort of began in the gold rush and is where we are today, what I would set as the highest priority. We are facing a rapid change in climate. The atmosphere is taking water away from us. So we are going to have to adapt to increasing scarcity.
After the break, we head to the mountains to talk snow, a critical part of our water portfolio. Welcome back to Water Wasted, an ABC10 special weather investigation.
California's water storage system is largely dependent on winter snow.
It melts slowly through the spring and fills our reservoirs. That provides water through the critically dry parts of the year.
But as our winters become more unpredictable, I'll be taking a look at how the state is using new tools to make sure that every snowflake is counted. There's an old saying in mountain towns that there's nothing better than the first snow of the season.
As a local, the vibe is always usually excited. You know, everybody's ready for the winter to come. It brings on skiing and ushers in a new season.
Like a distant relative coming to visit, this winter showed up early and stayed late. But family is family, and the love runs deep for local Jason Rolfe in South Lake Tahoe. He wanted to document the moment the snowpack turns into snow melt as it seemingly breathes in and out. It is in fact bringing life to plants, animals, and people hundreds of miles down the hill. Sean de Guzman works with the Department of Water Resources and might yield the most powerful simple pole in California. He helps make manual measurements of the snowpack to help nail down how much water is in that snow. And this tried and true method backs up the hundreds of automated sites in the state. Our snowpack is vital, providing at least 30% of our water in a year.
This is the only in-person, boots on the ground, field verification where we can actually verify that. The automated snow sensors are great, but they are out in the backcountry exposed to wilderness.
As crucial as this measurement is, you just need so much more data to really predict such an important metric.
As time has gone on from the 1920s, when our population was quite small and the agricultural demands on water were small, the environmental demands on water were also small, right? All of that. We've gone from that all the way to this time where our population is enormous and we have all of these demands to where we're down really to each water drop.
What started as a jet propulsion laboratory experiment with NASA has turned into a foundation of the future. Airborne snow observations uses lasers and spectrometers to measure the snowpack from the sky.
They can know to within about 2% how much water they're going to get as a minimum.
Almost every basin and range in the West is using these modern techniques to measure the snowpack because it will only become more important to get the data right as winters become more unpredictable. Innovation is the key to building a more sustainable water future in California. After the break, why that key might be below the ground. Welcome back to Water Wasted, an ABC10 special weather investigation.
Let's be honest, water issues are nothing new to California.
But in a changing climate, managing scarcity and weather whiplash is going to require innovation.
The state's focus right now and our new water frontier is where you can't see it, below the ground.
My fear is that you have a wet year and everyone forgets about the dry years.
It's been a struggle farming with no water. Daniel Bays, like thousands of other farmers, have had their bout with drought.
I would say the stress is probably the hardest part. Part of it, being in the office, looking at the numbers. Part of it just being out in the field with our employees.
But dealing with drought isn't new. We can trace it all the way back to 1933. California began re-engineering our water delivery with the Central Valley Project during the Dust Bowl era to deliver water from Northern California to the Central Valley through canals.
California was in the midst of a historic drought. There were just many wells going dry, drinking water wells, agricultural wells, lands were sinking, just a real concern that this is kind of spiraling to a place that is not good for the future of these regions.
And the seriousness of drought has farmers looking for alternative ways to save water.
About 400 miles of California's valleys have about 515 underground water basins. But what happens when all that groundwater is not there? Well, communities are hit hard.
You can drill down there and there might be enough water for a domestic well for a house, but if you were going to try and farm with it, the amount of water you get out of there would be such a minimal amount.
If more groundwater is pumped than is replenished, there could be subsidence.
In some places, sinking over 6 feet. In 2014, California passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, giving local water agencies about 10 years to make plans and find solutions to conserving water. The Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency is one example.
The city of Woodland had originally been on groundwater for about 100 years. We switched to Sacramento River surface water in June of 2016. And as part of that project, the city embarked on an aquifer storage and recovery program.
The system of pumps and pipes funnel water from a clean water source like the Sacramento River. A small amount of chlorine is added and is stored underground.
The aquifer layer that we are using is 500 feet down, 50-foot thick layer. At every well site we have in the city, both the native groundwater wells and even farmer wells outside of us, that layer exists kind of everywhere around here.
The big question has been, if there's that much aquifer storage, why aren't we doing more to store excess water underground? Scientists are now beginning to see a clearer picture by mapping what's underground from the sky.
AEM is the airborne electromagnetic surveys that we're doing across California. Think of it as MRI for the subsurface. So it's a way that a helicopter carries a large hoop about 100 feet off the ground, and it sends electrical information into the ground, which bounces off different layers below the ground surface.
This technology is finding where sands and gravels are in comparison to clays and silts. Water is easily able to seep deep underground where sands lay, but with clay, a buffer is created. And NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory is taking it even higher with satellites.
What we really get from satellite information is the ability to see the big picture. So contextually, we can kind of tie the whole story together. And we can say, you know, it's not just this farm or this well that's changing, it's the entire southern portion of the Central Valley.
Stanford geophysicist Rosemary Knight has spent 30 years working on geophysics for groundwater management in California.
I think there's a real opportunity here to help the water agencies now work with these data and see how these data can help them improve and inform their planning.
Knight and researchers from UC Davis found something out of the Ice Age.
They drew an area on a map and said one of these end of the last glacial period paleo valleys has to be here. We took the airborne EM system and flew back and forth to see if we could find it, and we could. It was right there in the data.
These old paleo rivers were formed when glaciers during the last glacial period started melting quickly. The water carved pathways from the mountains to the valley, moving large amounts of rock and grain material.
It's like a fast path where if we can connect with it at one location, we can actually move water down deeper within the groundwater system of the valley.
For third-generation farmer Daniel Bays, the hope is that his kids may have the option to continue farming in California.
My hope would be that if this is where they want to live and they want to continue farming, that's an option for them, that it's feasible and there's a long lifetime ahead of them where they can do that and pass that on to the next generation if that pleases them.
After the break, why sustaining the state's agriculture and economy may just lie in how we use the Delta.
A battle is underway in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta.
This is the source of water for the state and federal water projects, also the Bay Area.
and all the communities in the Delta and all the farms that exist across 700,000 acres.
For decades, Delta residents and the state have been unable to agree on a plan to transport water from the rainy but rural northern half of the state to the heavily populated but dry southern half. To improve water delivery and reliability, the state's Delta Conveyance Project aims to build a tunnel underneath of the Delta. Former Governor Jerry Brown proposed 2 tunnels. Current Governor Gavin Newsom has narrowed it down to 1. But to understand this project's significance and the controversy, we first need to look at the Delta itself. Water from across Northern California, from the Sacramento River to Sierra Snowmelt to the San Joaquin River, flows into the Delta on its way out to San Francisco Bay and the Pacific. The Delta is home to numerous species found nowhere else. It's an important stopover on the Pacific Flyway, and it's also become a fertile agricultural region.
About 75% of the land in the Delta is used for agriculture. Every crop from tomatoes to grapes, triticale and potatoes and corn, rice, and everything in between.
This poses a problem for all of California, as well as all those that depend on California-grown food. Right now, water transported from the Delta happens via pumping into the California Aqueduct, which runs roughly parallel to Interstate 5. But the current system was built in the mid-1900s to handle a population and climate that doesn't exist today.
It was designed to manage a different type of precipitation. We don't know exactly what will happen with climate change, but it's pretty clear that we're going to have more rain falling in the winter as opposed to snow that will then melt in the spring. The reservoirs are really designed for that spring runoff.
This takes us back to where we began. Under the direction of the Department of Water Resources, the state's plan to address these issues and future-proof California's water is to build a tunnel, larger than the English Channel Tunnel, underneath the Delta.
This year, if we had been able to have the Delta Conveyance Project online in January, we would have captured another 228,000 acre-feet of water, and that's enough to feed about 2.3 million people, or about 800,000 households.
First off, they really couldn't have moved extra water this year because there was no place to put the water.
Restore the Delta has been an outspoken critic of the tunnel project from the beginning.
It's really sad. Restore the Delta was really earnest when it went and participated with the Design Construction Authority for 2 years. We didn't like the project, but we figured, okay, we're going to sit at a table for 2 years. We're going to explain our water quality concerns around harmful algal blooms, salinity. We're going to explain our concerns around air pollution during construction. Those were the big pieces for us, and they weren't addressed.
Graham Bradner works with the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority, or DCA.
So we have a singular mission, which is to design and build a project should DWR decide to proceed with one.
The key players within the DCA are the Santa Clara Valley Water District and, unsurprisingly, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California.
Right from the beginning of our conceptual design process, engaged local communities through a stakeholder engagement committee. Our mission was to look for ways to reduce design and construction effects to communities and environment within the Delta.
We went through the scoping meetings where you couldn't give proper community impact. You could give your reports to a recorder. So sure, they held X amount of meetings, but if they don't listen, if they don't answer your questions, and they never take your concerns seriously, is that really meaningful engagement? We don't think so.
The California State Auditor released a report in May 2023 that said the Department of Water Resources has, quote, made only limited progress in accounting for the effects of climate change in its forecasts of the water supply and in its planning for the operation of the State Water Project. It goes on to say that until DWR makes more progress and uses better data, DWR will be less prepared than it could be to effectively manage the state's water resources in the face of more extreme climate conditions. The timeline for a complete and functioning Delta, should it be built, is at the very earliest a decade or two away. And by then, will it even still be relevant?
No, it's not. We're going to have to do everything else first. It's sad for us. We don't want to be spending time on this any longer. We've done this for years. We're working on other projects. We're doing water quality testing. We're working on floodplain restoration projects. We're training the next generation. But we will stand up and we will force them to do things the right way because it's all at stake for California.
The world is watching us here. If we fail to meet these challenges, we will fail in a way that sends a despairing message to all Californians and those well beyond.
As we wrap up, we really want to thank you for all your questions and feedback, because you have really helped shape this investigation.
And as we prepare for what could be another big water year with El Nino gaining momentum.
The global weather pattern has the potential to deliver much needed rain, but also catastrophic flooding.
We'll be following how the state responds, building on the knowledge from this past season, and if we face this year better prepared.